This is the Clockwork PicoCalc, and it's become one of my favorite handheld devices. I've always had a passion for handheld devices going all the way back to the 1980s. And on those devices, the appeal to me was a device I could use to program MMBasic on the go. But those single line displays and chiclet keyboards, they didn't really make things easy. Enter the PicoCalc, a custom clockwork device using a Raspberry Pi Pico connected to a vibrant IPS display screen. The PicoCalc can use differing custom firmware options that change what this device can do. But in this video, we're going to keep things simple and dive into the fun that you can have right away out of the box with the default MMBasic firmware. Now, part of the enjoyment of the PicoCalc is, of course, putting it together. So before we learn how to use the PicoCalc, here are some assembly tips and tricks. The first tip, the case is plastic, so take care not to scratch it. I recommend laying it down on a soft cloth or surface to work on. You really don't want to mar up the beautiful finish right away. Clockwork includes the Allen wrench you need to put everything together. It's a nice touch and no need to go hunt for your own tools. Now, when you get to the speakers, make sure to remove the protective layer. Also, double check the orientation. They should be in the orientation as shown in the guide. And here's a crucial tip. Leave the protective layer on the screen and ignore the directions to take it off initially. This will protect the screen from fingerprints as you assemble the rest of the device. Don't worry, you'll be able to pull that screen off after it's installed as long as you ensure this little tab is pointing out. Lucky for me, my keycaps were already in place when I took it out of the box. Yours should too, so I just left them in place. If yours are not where they should be, just follow the assembly guide and drop them right into place. Mounting the Raspberry Pi Pico was easier than even I expected. Just make sure each and every pin is in place on top of the headers before applying that firm press. Remember, the micro USB port should be pointing up and in line with the USB-C port on the motherboard. Why are both USB ports included? More on that a little bit later in the video. Now, the most fragile part of the process is that tiny screen ribbon cable. Take care to open the post connector slowly. I used a very small screwdriver to gently lift the locking bar. Then insert the cable carefully. How far should you insert the cable? Clockwork makes this easy for us with this guideline. Insert the cable until the line on the ribbon cable matches the line on the motherboard. Then snap the connector back onto the ribbon. Mounting the motherboard is pretty straightforward. Just make sure the outer holes sit over the screw receive post and everything will line up nicely. Give each little screw post a nice little push to make sure that they seat perfectly with the motherboard. The instructions tell you to insert the SD card at this point, but here's a tip. You don't have to. You can wait, since there's an easy access opening after assembly. Let's put the back shell on and use the machine screws and again that included tool to finish the case assembly. Tighten them just enough to secure the case. You don't want to crack the case or strip the screws. Now, insert 1 or 2 batteries. Hey, more on this later, but the PicoCalc can operate on a single battery, and as you'll learn later, we can hot swap batteries if you have 2. Now it's time to install the glass panel. This is critical, so be very careful not to touch the inside of the glass. Remove the adhesive backing from the glass panel, and now is the time you will also remove the screen protective layer using that tab. Place the glass panel in the correct orientation on the top of the screen and carefully but firmly press down on the edges around the screen. It will adhere and you will never have to worry about removing it again. Remember we talked about the batteries? Here's that tip. You do not need to use both batteries. You can, but UConsole designed the PicoCalc to hot swap batteries one at a time so that you can change the batteries without losing the contents of your memory. Oh, and one more thing about PicoCalc hardware. You can swap the Raspberry Pi Pico that comes with the PicoCalc with newer models like the Raspberry Pi Pico W or even the Pico 2. This opens up the door to even more possibilities like adding Wi-Fi, more internal storage, and processing power to your device. I do not go into how to do this in this video, but if you're interested in this topic, drop a comment down below and let me know. All right, now that we have our PicoCalc assembled, let's get down to some fun stuff. And when I say fun, I mean programming with MMBasic. But before we do, there are convenient hardware controls that you should really know about. For instance, to toggle on the device, hold the power button for 1 second. The device remembers states during each power on/off. What does that mean? Well, that means it will retain whatever was in memory during your last usage. That's a nice feature missing from our old Commodore computers back in the day. As you're using the PicoCalc, you'll likely want to check the battery level and adjust the screen brightness and keyboard backlight. Yes, it has a backlight on the keyboard. Here's how you can do that. To check the battery level, press and hold the Alt key and then press the B key. The top left LED on the PicoCalc will blink in a pattern to indicate the battery level. 3 flashes indicates a high battery level. 2 flashes indicates a medium battery level. And you guessed it, 1 flash indicates you need to change your batteries pretty quickly. To increase the screen brightness, hold the Alt key and press the greater than key. To decrease the brightness, press and hold the Alt key and then the less than key. To toggle the keyboard backlight brightness levels, press and hold the Alt key and then press the space. So what we have is an Alt plus space keyboard combination. Each press of this combination will cycle through the backlight settings. Hey, and for you terminal ninjas that are used to Linux, you'll be happy to know that arrow up and arrow down lets us cycle through previous commands, making it easier to repeat or modify commands. But the PicoCalc does not save these commands between power on/off sessions. While these shortcuts will work on the default MMBasic firmware, they may not be available when you use custom firmware. Check the firmware documentation to see if they have included these keystroke combinations. Now, before I show you how to program on the PicoCalc, and if you are enjoying this video and want to see more cool gadget material, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring that bell. Do all that stuff down below so you don't miss out on future videos. Now, let's get back to our MMBasic PicoCalc tutorial. When you first boot your PicoCalc, you'll load the MMBasic interpreter. This is where you can type commands directly and see immediate results. We call this direct mode, or you can use the built-in editor to type out longer programs. But what is MMBasic? Well, it was created by Jeff Graham. It's a powerful yet user-friendly dialect of the classic BASIC language that powered many of our favorite 8-bit computers like Commodore and Atari. MMBasic offers a modern approach, making it easy for anyone to write programs, explore the PicoCalc's hardware, and create retro-style games or apps. Now, you can find more information about MMBasic on Jeff Graham's project website. I'll have the link down in the video description below. Let's try one of the simplest things you can do. Let's use the PicoCalc as, well, let's use it as a calculator. Just type in your math problems in BASIC and press enter. For instance, try this command. Print 5 plus 10. Press enter. There you go, our results. But wait, do we really need to type the entire print command every time we want to type in a calculation? Let's try that old Commodore shortcut, which substitutes the print command with the question mark symbol. Let's see. Question mark, 25 divided by 5. Check it out. Sweet. It works. So as you can see, MMBasic includes some of the cool little shortcuts that we had in our original Commodore BASIC. Let's try a couple more. All right, everything seems to be working. You can even use the more complex expressions and functions that MMBasic offers. Check out the documentation for a full list. Before I look at programming, you first need to understand some file management commands for both the Pico's internal memory and for accessing the SD card. First, power off the PicoCalc, and now you can insert an SD card into the card slot. Once the PicoCalc has booted to the MMBasic prompt, you'll know it with that greater than symbol, we need to tell it to look at the SD card. The PicoCalc recognizes the SD card as the B: drive. Now that may seem really familiar for those back in the day who used MS-DOS. But to make the B drive active, simply type B: and press enter. Now we're going to differ from what we used to do with MS-DOS by typing the dir command, and we're going to use a file unique to MMBasic called files. Then we're going to press enter. As you can see, this lists all the files and folders on the SD card. To load a basic program, which will have that .bas extension, use the, you guessed it, load command followed by the file name in quotes. For example, if you have a program called mygame.bas, you would type load open quotations, mygame.bas. Now here's a shortcut. Like Commodore Basic, you don't have to close those quotations. That'll save you a keystroke. Once a program is loaded, type run followed by enter to execute the program. You can also load and run a program in one step by using the run command followed by the file name in quotes. While the list command will list the contents of program in memory, it is also useful to list the contents of a program from a storage location. For instance, use the list command followed by the program name surrounded by quotations will display the contents of that file. It does not load it into memory, but this is a great way to discover what's in a file if the file name is too vague. Now to save a program, use the save command followed by the program name surrounded by, you guessed it, quotation marks. Here's a sample flow of commands you can use when creating a program in MMBasic. This won't be the case for everything you do, but this is a great flow chart to get you started. First of all, we generally want to clear the memory with the new command. Then we would typically type edit, or here's a shortcut, you can press F4 to enter the built-in code editor. Within the code editor, type your program. When you're done with your program, press F1 to exit the editor. I always like to use the list command to view the program again outside of the editor. Now, select the B drive by typing B:, followed by the enter key. This is going to allow us to save the program to the internal SD card. Type the name of your program. Again, make sure it is surrounded by quotation marks or at least has the first one. Then type run to execute the program. It's always important that you save before you type run because you could have a program that will lock your computer up and you won't have had an opportunity to save the program. Now, the good news is, unlike our old Commodore computers, that program is saved in the firmware's memory. So even powering down and powering back up, it should be in memory again. But let's be careful and go ahead and save it anyway before we run. Now, if the program is a loop or you need to quit the execution, you can press Shift plus Escape to issue the break command. This will stop the program dead in its tracks. Now, what if you want to display an image? Well, the PicoCalc can load .bmp image files. The image files need to be in a compatible format, a 24-bit color bitmap with a 320 by 320 resolution. That's important so it will fit on the PicoCalc screen. The free open source GIMP is an excellent tool for converting and exporting images. To load a BMP image, use the load image command followed by the file name in quotes. For example, if you have an image called logo.bmp, you would type load image, open quotations, logo.bmp, close quotations. Your image is displayed on the PicoCalc screen and in color. You may have thought it was just a black and green screen. Nope, it is a color screen, folks. In these examples, I use the SD card for storage. You can also store files directly on the Raspberry Pi Pico's internal memory. The Pico assigns A: to this area. Use the A: command to switch to that location. All the commands we've used for the B drive work for the A drive, but remember, storage is really limited on the Pico. It's fine for basic programs, but you won't have a lot of room for image or audio files. And that's how easy it is to load and run programs and display images on the PicoCalc. Now, you've seen the basics and you might be thinking, hey, I'd like to try making my own programs for the PicoCalc. Where do I start? Well, you're in luck. There are some great resources out there to help you get started with MMBasic. Now, the best place to start is with the official documentation for PicoMite, which is the version of MMBasic that runs on the PicoCalc. You can find a user manual on the Clockwork Pi GitHub repository. I'll put a link in the video description below. This manual is comprehensive and covers all the commands and features of MMBasic. I also recommend you upload this to your favorite AI tool and query the AI for some specific examples that you want to try. The Clockwork Pi forum is another great resource full of PicoCalc users ready to answer questions. There's a dedicated section for PicoCalc where people share tips, code, and help each other out. It's a great place to not only ask questions, but see what others are creating on the device. You can also check out Jeff Graham's project website that we talked about earlier, and his site has a wealth of information, tutorials, and examples for various versions of MMBasic. And of course, let's not forget YouTube. Mine is but one of many videos on this device. Want a true retro experience? Explore old Commodore 64, Apple II, and other 8-bit computer basic manuals. While MMBasic isn't exactly the same as those older dialects, you'll find that many of the core concepts and fundamental commands work. These old manuals are a fantastic source of inspiration and provide a glimpse into the history of home computing. And most are available as a PDF file on archive.org. Now it's time to create a basic program. To do this, we'll use the built-in editor. Type Edit and press Enter, or again, you can tap F4. This will take you to a simple text editor. Now for that authentic retro experience, you can write your programs with line numbers. Just start each line with a number followed by your basic command. Let's create a program that creates hello 5 times. Once you've typed your program, press F1 to exit the editor. Type Run and press Enter to execute the program. Hopefully you won't have any syntax errors, but if you do, just return to the editor, make the changes, press F1 to exit, and try again. Basic has always been about trial, error, and iteration. Now, if line numbers seem to 70s and 80s for you, MMBasic also lets you write structured programs without line numbers. Here's a sample of the same program again without line numbers. Once again, press F1 to exit the editor and use the Run command to see the code in action. It's that simple to create your own programs. Now, if you find typing on the PicoCalc small keyboard a little challenging, you're not on the go, or if you want to copy and paste code, you can connect your PicoCalc to your computer and use a terminal program to act as your keyboard. For my example, I use a little software called CoolTerm for Mac, which is also available for Linux and Windows. You can also use PuTTY or even the screen command using a terminal. When you plug the PicoCalc into your computer using the USB-C cable, it will create a serial connection. Make sure to configure your terminal program to connect to the serial port at a baud rate of 115/200. The process to configure the terminal command or serial connection software is a bit fidgety and really beyond the scope of this video. But once connected, anything you type in the terminal will be sent to the PicoCalc, and anything the PicoCalc displays will appear in your terminal window, except for image files, those .bmp files. This is a fantastic way to program, especially for longer bits of code. You can even write your code in a text editor on your computer and then simply copy and paste it into the terminal window connected to your PicoCalc. All right, let's add devices and learn more about the PicoCalc's GPIO or General Purpose Input-Output pins. These pins allow your PicoCalc to interact with the real world by controlling external components like LEDs, motors, and sensors. Think of the GPIO pins as digital switches that your PicoCalc can turn on or off. We can set a pin to be an output, meaning that the PicoCalc can send a signal through it, or an input, meaning the PicoCalc can actually read the signal coming into the device. Now for this demonstration, I'm going to blink an LED using the GP21 GPIO pin. I connect an LED to the GPIO connector in series using an inline resistor to limit current to the LED, which could potentially burn it out. A common value for an LED resistor is around 220 ohms. Here's the basic circuit, and this small breadboard makes things plug and play. I connect one end of the resistor to a GP21 pin on the PicoCalc, the other end of the resistor to the positive or longer leg or anode of the LED, and the negative leg or the shorter leg or cathode of the LED to the ground, which is the GND pin on the PicoCalc. I'll now use MMBasic commands to control that LED. First, let's try direct mode. Remember, direct mode is where we can enter commands without having to create a program. I need to tell the PicoCalc that we want to use GPIO pin 21 as an output. So I'm going to set pin GP21, D out. Now that the pin is set as an output, let's light it up by setting GP21 to on or high using the command pin open parentheses, GP21, close parentheses, equals 1. To turn the light off, set the pin off or low. Simply replace the 1 with a 0. Remember, you can use the arrow up command to display the last command you typed to make the change quickly. That's direct mode, but can you also create basic programs that utilize the GPIO pins? You can, and here's one that makes the LED blink. Once you've typed in the program, exit the editor, save the file to the SD card or the Pico, use the save command, save it as something like led-blink.bas, and then use the run command to execute the program. And that's a basic introduction to using GPIO pins on the PicoCalc with MMBasic. See what I did there? You can control many interesting things with these pins. Remember to always be careful when connecting external components and always use resistors to protect your devices and the PicoCalc. I mentioned at the beginning of the video I would not focus on custom firmware, but for completeness, here's an example of how to change the firmware on the PicoCalc. If you review the contents of the SD card, you'll find demo firmware files in a folder. Let's load the NES emulator and fire up a game of Galaga. The most common way to install custom firmware involves connecting your PicoCalc to your computer via the micro USB cable. This will not work with the USB-C cable. This is why we have access to both USB ports. You'll need to put the internal Raspberry Pi Pico into bootloader mode. Power down the PicoCalc. Press and hold down this little button between the vents using something like this screwdriver. While holding the button down, plug in the micro USB cable to the PicoCalc. A drive on your computer will appear. Open up that drive. The custom firmware files are in a format labeled .uf2. You'll need to copy or drag and drop this file to the root of this new drive. Drag the U2 file for the firmware you want to install. In my case, it's the NES emulator. The file will copy, and once it is complete, the drive will automatically eject itself from the computer, reboot, and load the new firmware. Now, in my case, I also dropped a Galaga ROM onto the SD card, and when the new firmware booted, it recognized the ROM immediately and gave me the option to play the game. Check the firmware for the proper emulated keys. To change the volume, use the volume wheel on the PicoCalc. Sound comes from either the headphone jack or those wonderful little built-in speakers. I really encourage you to explore all the custom firmware that comes with the PicoCalc. It's fast, easy, and unlocks even more PicoCalc features and capabilities. And you can be sure that even more firmware is coming for this device. All right, so there you have it. That's how you can start having fun with the PicoCalc and its built-in MMBasic right out of the box. From using it as a simple calculator to writing your first retro-style programs to connecting LED lights, the possibilities are endless. If you're interested in getting your hands on a PicoCalc, check out the link in the video description below. Thanks to Clockwork for sending this unit to me. And let me know in the comments how you plan to use your PicoCalc. And if you love handheld gadgets like I do, be sure to check out my handhelds playlist right here. That is it for me, folks. Retro Combs out.